When the most dangerous man at the wedding takes her hand for a single dance, she thinks it's nothing, until he whispers that one dance is all he needs to claim her, and the entire room realizes she's no longer invisible. Lila kept her head down as she wove through the glittering ballroom, tray balanced on her palm, smile soft and practiced. Weddings were supposed to be magical, but for her they were just long shifts, sore feet, and polite guests who looked right through her. Tonight was no different. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across the room, catching on champagne flutes and diamonds, but none of it belonged to her world. Lila moved through the celebration like a ghost, seen only as a uniform, a pair of steady hands, a girl who blended into the wallpaper. Invisible, safe, forgettable. That was how she liked it. From her place near the bar, she watched the bride twirl in a snow of rose petals, watched guests laugh as if joy were endless and easy. Her manager barked an order, and she hurried toward table 7 with a fresh tray of drinks. But then something shifted. She didn't notice him at first, not until the air around her changed, cooled, sharpened, like a shadow had stepped into the light. Lila glanced up, preparing to offer a polite smile, and froze. He was sitting alone at the far end of the ballroom, a man in a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked molded onto him. Broad shoulders relaxed in a way that felt intentional, controlled, as if he were allowing himself to sit still rather than needing to. Dark hair, darker eyes, sharp features that didn't belong in a room filled with soft laughter. Alessandro Rinaldi. She didn't know him personally, of course, but everyone knew the name. Staff whispered about him in the prep kitchen minutes after he walked in, voices trembling with something between fascination and fear. The Rinaldis controlled half the city. Money, power, influence that made politicians bow in gratitude and criminals bow in terror. And Alessandro was the quiet one, the one no one crossed unless they had a death wish. Lila had made a point not to look his way again. But when she passed through a cluster of guests carrying her tray, her eyes drifted back toward him, just for a second. He was already looking at her, not glancing, not idly observing, watching. His gaze settled on her with unsettling steadiness, following her effortlessly through the room, as if she were the only person moving. Lila's breath hitched. She quickly looked away, heat rushing to her cheeks, telling herself she was imagining it. Why on earth would a man like that look at a girl like her? She returned to the kitchen to drop off empty glasses, hoping the moment would fade. But when she stepped back into the ballroom, his eyes found her again almost instantly, like a thread pulling taut between them. She ignored it, or tried to. She kept refilling glasses, clearing plates, adjusting centerpieces. But every time she glanced up, even accidentally, he was there in her periphery, a storm in a perfectly tailored suit, gaze anchored to her as if studying something he couldn't quite name. Guests approached him, attempting smiles, handshakes, conversation. He offered polite nods, nothing more, attention drifting back to her every time. Lila didn't understand it. She'd been invisible all night, all her life, yet under that gaze she felt exposed. Not threatened, but seen in a way she didn't recognize. Dangerously seen. At one point, she reached for a champagne flute. At the same moment, a guest bumped her tray. It wobbled, glasses tilting. Before she could react, a hand shot out. Not the guest's, not hers. His. Alessandro stood beside her, steadying the tray with a calm precision that stole her breath. "Careful," he murmured. Lila blinked at him, startled. I'm sorry, sir." "You don't need to apologize." His voice was low, smooth, with an accent that curled around the edges of sentences. "Not to me." She didn't know where to look. His hand was still on the tray, close to hers. His presence was overwhelming, too still, too controlled, too aware. He released the tray only when he was sure she had regained her balance. Then he stepped back, not fully, just enough to let her breathe, though his eyes didn't leave her for a single heartbeat. "Enjoy your evening," she whispered, because she didn't know what else to say. His lips curved. Not a smile exactly, but something amused. "I am." Her pulse stuttered. He walked away, blending into the crowd effortlessly, yet somehow still the most noticeable man in the room. Lila tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the truth pressed against her skin like a secret. The most powerful man at the wedding had looked at her. Really looked. And she couldn't shake the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that he wasn't finished. The slow song drifted through the open doors of the ballroom, violins soft, voices warm, the kind of melody that wrapped around the couples on the dance floor like ribbon. Lila stood at the edge of the chaos, holding an empty tray, chest tight with an ache she would never admit aloud. This world wasn't hers. These songs weren't hers. This happiness wasn't hers. But for one moment, just one, she wanted to pretend. Her shift was almost over. The other servers were busy dealing with the wedding cake, and no one was paying attention to the girl in black, blending into shadows like a forgotten note. So she slipped outside. The back patio was quiet, washed in moonlight and strung with fairy lights that glowed faint gold. The music spilled softly through the open door, mingling with the faint scent of roses from the garden. The night air touched her skin gently, far kinder than the ballroom filled with glittering expectation. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. Let herself sway. Let her shoulders loosen. Let her heart unfurl. Her hips moved subtly, the hem of her dress brushing her legs. Her fingers traced the air as if holding an invisible partner. She imagined being someone else, someone allowed to be seen, to be held, to be chosen. A warm breeze brushed her neck, except it wasn't a breeze, it was presence. Her body went still, breath catching in her throat. She opened her eyes slowly. Alessandro Rinaldi stood in the doorway, not looking at the gardens, not looking at the stars, looking at her, like he'd followed the sound of her heartbeat rather than the music. He didn't move, but the way he watched her felt like a step forward. Heat sliding over her skin, settling deep in her chest. His jacket had been discarded somewhere inside. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, his tie loosened, the top button undone. Danger softened by moonlight, a storm pretending to rest. But his eyes, dark, unblinking, intent, were very awake. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said quietly. Her pulse tripped. "I was just taking a break." "You were dancing," but she didn't. He stopped in front of her, not touching her, just near enough that she felt the warmth of his body, the quiet command he wore like a second skin. The music drifted out in a soft swell of violins. Alessandro extended his hand, long fingers, steady palm, an invitation shaped like temptation. "Dance with me," he murmured. Lila's breath shook. I can't. I'm working." "You're on break," he countered softly, "and it's just one dance." She stared at his hand, at him, at the quiet certainty in his gaze. "Why me?" A slow, devastating smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because," he said, "I saw you dancing alone, and one dance is all I need to claim you." The words weren't loud. They weren't aggressive. They were simply true, spoken in a tone that felt like a promise wrapped in velvet and steel. Her heart flipped violently. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "You belong exactly where I'm standing," he replied. He didn't push, didn't demand. He simply waited, his palm open, patience etched into every line of him, but his eyes burning with something far more dangerous. Her hand lifted before she could stop it. Barely a breath of contact, and the moment her fingers touched his, something shifted. Not the music, not the air. Something inside her, something inside him. Alessandro drew her in gently, as if she were made of spun glass instead of exhaustion and uncertainty. One hand slid to her waist, warm and steady, holding her like she mattered. Like she was the reason he'd come outside. They moved slowly, bodies close enough to feel each rise and fall of breath. Lila had never danced with a man like this. Quiet, certain, protective in a way that felt impossibly intimate. "Relax," he murmured, voice brushing her ear. "I've got you." Her eyes fluttered shut. She let herself lean into him, the world falling away until there was only the rhythm of his steps and the echo of her heartbeat. When she opened her eyes again, he was looking at her with an intensity that pulled her apart and pieced her back together. One dance, just one. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified her. He hadn't meant it literally. The doors to the ballroom swung open just as Alessandro's hand slid up Lila's spine. Not improper, not rushed, but deliberate enough that her breath trembled in her chest. They stepped back into the room together, still moving to the music, still connected at the waist and the hand, still living inside the illusion of that solitary dance. Except now they were no longer alone, and the whole room saw them. It happened slowly at first, one guest noticing, then another, heads turning, conversations trailing off mid-sentence as curiosity shifted into disbelief. The murmurs spread like ripples through a still pond. Is that her? A server? With him? He's dancing with a waitress? God, look at the way he's holding her. He's never touched anyone at a public event. Lila felt their stares like heat against her skin. She kept her gaze down, afraid that if she met a single pair of eyes, she'd crumble under the weight of their judgment. But Alessandro didn't let her shrink. His fingers tightened lightly at her waist, guiding her closer, angling her body toward his like he was shielding her from the crowd without breaking their dance. "Eyes on me," he murmured. She swallowed hard. "Everyone is staring." "I know," he said, with a calmness that felt almost satisfied. "Let them." His voice was gentle, but beneath it lay something darker. Certainty, possession, intent. It wrapped around her like warm smoke. Lila dared to look up at him. He held her gaze, unbothered by the watching eyes, his expression a mixture of focus and something she didn't dare name. Someone gasped when he brushed his thumb against the back of her hand. Someone else whispered, "He's claiming her, in front of everyone." Lila's pulse thudded painfully. No, he couldn't mean that. This had to be a dream, a moment, a slip of a powerful man's curiosity, not something that carved itself into concrete, but Alessandro's eyes said otherwise. Then the room shifted again. A new kind of tension rippled through the guests, sharper, tighter. Lila felt it before she understood it. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. She turned her head slightly, and her blood ran cold. At the far end of the room, near the bar, stood Daniel. Her ex. His face paled when he saw her, then flushed red, blooming with anger so vivid it twisted his features. He gripped his glass hard enough she thought it might shatter. His jaw clenched, the muscle ticking violently. He stared at her like she was property that had slipped its leash. And he stared at Alessandro like he'd found the man to blame. Panic flickered inside her chest. She stumbled, the illusion of the dance cracking. Alessandro's hand instantly steadied her. "Easy," he murmured. She couldn't stop herself. Her gaze snapped toward Daniel once more, her breath catching. Alessandro followed her line of sight, and when he saw the man glaring in their direction, something inside him changed. His posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. His jaw locked, his eyes darkened, not with jealousy exactly, but with recognition. Assessment. A predator marking another predator too close to its prey. He lowered his head until his lips brushed the curve of her temple. "Who is he?" The question was soft, but deadly in its softness. "No one," she whispered too fast. "Someone I don't want to talk about." Alessandro didn't look away from Daniel. "He looks at you like he owns you." Her heart stuttered. "He doesn't." His grip tightened, just briefly. Good. She should have felt fear at the cold edge in his tone, the promise threaded between the syllables, but instead she felt something startlingly different. Safety. Protection. A strange anchoring warmth. The music swelled, but no one cared anymore. The bride and groom were forgotten. Even the chandelier's glittering brilliance faded compared to the silent confrontation stretching across the room. Daniel took a step forward. Leela flinched. Alessandro moved instantly. Not away from her, but closer, their bodies aligning, his hand sliding from her waist to the small of her back. Protective, claiming, warning. Without raising his voice, without breaking their hold, he looked directly at Daniel. One glance, one warning, one unspoken message. Try it. Daniel stopped dead. The band played on, oblivious. Guests stared, breathless. And in the center of it all, Alessandro guided Lila into another turn, his hand firm, his eyes softening only when they returned to her. "You're safe," he said quietly. Tears pricked at her eyes. Humiliation, relief, fear, all tangled together. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He stared at her like the answer should already be obvious. "That dance," he murmured, brushing his thumb across her waist, "wasn't enough." Her heart twisted painfully, and deep down, dangerously deep, she feared she agreed. The music shifted, richer, deeper, a slow rhythm that wrapped around the ballroom like velvet. Conversations faded into soft murmurs. Glasses stilled mid-air. The candlelight reflected across polished marble, bathing the room in gold. And Alessandro didn't move. His hand stayed at Lila's waist, firm but gentle, anchoring her in place. His other hand held hers as if he'd been doing it his whole life. He drew her a breath closer, enough that she felt the heat of him, enough that the world outside their bodies blurred into insignificance. "Keep your eyes on me," he murmured again. She tried, but the weight of 100 staring eyes tugged at her, dragging her back into panic. She wasn't supposed to be seen here. She wasn't supposed to be part of the celebration, let alone at the center of it, dancing with the most powerful man in the room. Her voice shook. "Everyone's watching!" "Yes," he said, his gaze steady, unashamed, unwavering. "They should." Her breath hitched. No one had ever looked at her like she was worth being witnessed. A ripple moved through the room then, a shift in energy that put Alessandro on alert before Lila even understood what was happening. His hand tightened, not painfully, but possessively. His posture straightened, shoulders squaring. Someone was coming toward them. Lila's pulse kicked, dread clawing at her throat. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Daniel. Her ex walked across the dance floor with the confidence of a man who had decided that tonight he would reclaim what he believed belonged to him. His jaw was tight, his expression sour with entitlement and bruised pride. His gaze flicked over Lila's dress, her held hand, her body pressed against another man's. He saw her dancing. He saw who she was dancing with. And he still came closer. Alessandro's thumb moved once against her hip, a silent warning that he was aware, prepared, and not about to release her. Daniel stopped inches away from them, chest puffed, voice oily with false charm. "Lila," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Mind if I cut in?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Fear strangled her voice, a reflex built from too many nights bracing for his anger, his control. But she didn't have to speak. Alessandro did. He didn't turn his head. He didn't loosen his hold. He didn't give Daniel even the courtesy of acknowledgement. He simply curled his fingers tighter around her waist and said one icy sentence that sliced through the ballroom like a blade. "She's with me." Silence. A sharp, chilling silence. It spread outward like frost on glass, freezing the room in place. Guests stopped dancing. The bride's parents exchanged startled glances. Even the band faltered for half a beat. Daniel blinked, thrown off by the calm finality in Alessandro's tone. "Excuse me? I said I want to dance with her." Alessandro finally turned his head. Very slowly. His eyes settled on Daniel with the lethal stillness of a predator measuring prey. Not worth his time, but close enough to be dangerous. "You heard me," Alessandro said, his voice low, smooth, lethal silk. "She's with me." Daniel scoffed, trying to mask the tremor in his hands. "She isn't yours." For the first time, Alessandro let a hint of a smile curve his mouth. Not warmth, not amusement, but something colder, calculated, certain. "Walk away," he murmured, "while you still can." Lila felt her knees weaken, not from fear of Alessandro, but from the way his body angled protectively toward hers, keeping her shielded from any potential threat. Daniel's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, for approval, for anything that would justify escalating this moment. He found none. No one would challenge Alessandro Rinaldi. No one would stand between him and what he had just claimed. Daniel's pride wavered, then cracked. His lips curled back in something like frustration, but he stepped back. One step, then another, before turning abruptly and storming off the dance floor. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, the band regained its footing. The guests remembered how to breathe, and Alessandro, never breaking his hold, lowered his head until his forehead nearly brushed hers. "You're safe," he murmured. Emotion tightened her throat. "Why did you do that?" His eyes softened for the briefest heartbeat before something darker, deeper took its place. "Because," he whispered, "no man touches what I choose to hold." Her breath stuttered. "And I choose you. Tonight. And after." The music swelled again, but nothing could drown out the truth humming between them now. She had been invisible. Until him. And now, she was marked. "Seen," claimed. The second the song ended, the spell broke, but Alessandro didn't release her. His hand stayed at the small of her back, steady and warm, guiding her through the sea of eyes that refused to look away. Lila tried to breathe, tried to convince her trembling hands to still, but her body was still vibrating from the dance, from the claim he had made in front of everyone. "She's with me," it echoed in her bones. He led her toward the edge of the ballroom, past crystal chandeliers and white roses, and the stunned silence of people who couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. Alessandro Rinaldi, that Alessandro, had chosen the invisible waitress to hold in his arms. When the doors to the outdoor terrace closed behind them, the cool night air rushed in like mercy. Lila stepped away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. The moonlight reflected off the marble railing, and the distant city lights glittered like broken glass. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to understand what had just happened. Alessandro didn't crowd her. He stood a few feet away, watching her with eyes that were far too sharp, far too knowing for comfort. "You're shaking," he said softly. Lila swallowed hard. "You caused that." He didn't deny it. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, hands sliding into the pockets of his suit pants, posture relaxed in a way that felt entirely intentional. Controlled. Dangerous. "You handled yourself well inside," he murmured. "Most would have panicked." "I wanted to," she admitted, voice trembling. "I'm not used to people staring at me like that." "No," Alessandro said. "You're used to being overlooked." The truth of it hit her like a breath she hadn't expected to choke on. Her chest tightened, and she looked away, fingers curling against the stone railing. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "You shouldn't think I don't notice," he countered. Silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions, and a tension that curled slowly between them. Finally, Lila forced the words out. "Who are you? Really?" Alessandro's eyes gleamed in the moonlight, dark, dangerous, amused. "You danced with me," he said slowly, "but you don't know my name?" She hesitated. "I know your first name. People said it once or twice, but your last name..." She couldn't finish the sentence, because she already suspected, because her ex had practically fled the room the second Alessandro looked his way, because the whispers had chased her through the kitchen all night. "Someone from the Rinaldi family is here. The Rinaldi." Alessandro watched her with a level of patience that felt like a luxury he didn't give many people. Then he closed the last few inches between them. "I am Alessandro Rinaldi," he said quietly, "head of the Rinaldi family. Every deal that moves through this city goes through me first. Every powerful family sends their respect. Every enemy," his gaze darkened, "knows my name before they die." Her breath faltered. There it was. The truth delivered not as a threat, but as a simple fact. As casually as if he'd told her the time of day. Lila stared up at him, heart pounding, mind racing with every horror story she'd ever heard whispered in alleyways and bars. You're a Mafia boss, she breathed. Yes. And you danced with me. He lifted a hand, brushing a stray curl from her cheek with a tenderness that contradicted everything he'd just confessed. I didn't dance with you, he corrected, voice low. I chose you. Her heart skittered. This isn't a game, Lila, he continued. I don't chase things to pass the time, and I don't touch what I don't intend to keep. Her knees went weak. Why me? She whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough, he murmured. I know you're brave enough to walk away from men who don't deserve you. I know you'd rather blend into a crowd than beg for attention. I know you're careful with your words, careful with your heart. His fingers lightly traced her jaw. And I know, he added softly, that the moment you stepped onto that patio alone, you were mine to find. Lila took a shaky breath, tears pricking her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intensity of being seen for the first time in years. What do you want from me? She asked. His answer came without hesitation. Time, he said. One night to start. And after that, we see how long it takes before you stop pretending you don't want me to. Lila's pulse stuttered. So you're not finished with me, she whispered. Alessandro smiled, slow, devastating, certain. I haven't even begun. The night should have ended after the dance, after the terrace, after hearing Alessandro Rinaldi speak her name like it meant something. But the universe never let Lila have something beautiful without demanding a bruise in return. She slipped back inside the venue through a side hallway, needing to grab her bag before clocking out. Her nerves were still buzzing, her mind replaying the way Alessandro's fingers had brushed her cheek, the way his voice had wrapped around her like silk and warning all at once. She didn't notice the shadow waiting near the back exit. Not until a hand shot out and grabbed her arm. What the hell do you think you're doing? Daniel hissed, shoving her back against the brick wall just outside the catering door. The cold hit her spine, stealing her breath. Her stomach dropped. Daniel! Let go! You humiliated me, he snarled, leaning in close, breath hot with anger and alcohol. You made me look like an idiot in front of everyone. Lila clenched her jaw, fighting the old instinct to shrink. I didn't do anything. You caused a scene. Oh, so now you're blaming me? His grip tightened, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. You think you're too good for me now? You think that rich bastard wants you? Her pulse spiked. Let me go. Please. No, he spat. You owe me a... He didn't finish the sentence, because suddenly his hand was gone. Ripped away. Daniel stumbled back with a sharp cry, clutching his wrist like it had been crushed in a vice. His eyes widened when he saw who stood behind him. Alessandro. Silent, motionless, deadly. A darkness clung to him that hadn't been there during their dance, an aura that made the air feel thinner, heavier, harder to breathe, the kind of presence that warned every instinct in a person to run. But Daniel didn't run, not at first. He puffed up his chest, trying to salvage pride. This is none of your business. Alessandro stepped forward, and the night temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. He did not touch Daniel again. He didn't have to. The threat radiated from him like cold heat. Take one more step toward her, Alessandro murmured, and you won't walk away tonight. Daniel froze. You can't talk to me like... I'm not talking, Alessandro cut in softly. I'm promising. The words didn't rise in volume. They didn't carry anger. That made them infinitely worse. Alessandro shifted his gaze to Lila, and the transformation was startling. His expression softening by a fraction, enough to reveal what Daniel had failed to understand. She mattered. To him. And that made this moment lethal. He reached for her hand, weaving their fingers together with slow, deliberate certainty, before turning back to Daniel. You grabbed her, Alessandro said. You touched her without her consent. Daniel swallowed hard, bravado bleeding into fear. She's my girlfriend. Ex, Lila whispered. Alessandro's jaw flexed in satisfaction. There it is. You no longer have any claim to her. None. And you will never speak to her, approach her, or look in her direction again. Daniel bristled. You think you can tell me what to do? Alessandro took a single step forward. Daniel stumbled back like he'd been shoved. I don't think, Alessandro said quietly. I know. Something in Daniel snapped. His fear finally overpowered his stupidity, and he tried to turn away. But Alessandro wasn't finished. Daniel, he said, voice calm enough to chill bone. Look at me. Against his own will, Daniel obeyed. Threatening her, Alessandro said, is threatening me. I assume you understand what that means. Daniel's face drained of color. I wasn't threatening. You were, Alessandro said simply, and there will not be a second time. Daniel backed away, tripping over his own feet as he rushed toward the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness. Silence settled like dust. Lila realized then that her hand was shaking in Alessandro's. He felt it. He stepped closer. Did he hurt you? The softness in his voice was in shocking contrast to the violence that had just crackled through the air. She shook her head. No, he used to, but not tonight. Alessandro lifted her chin gently with 2 fingers, his gaze scanning her face for any sign of injury before locking onto her eyes. That man will never touch you again, he said. Not as long as I'm breathing. Her throat tightened. You didn't have to step in. I did, he corrected. I will always step in. A tremor ran through her. Not fear, but something far deeper, far more dangerous. Why? She whispered. Alessandro leaned in until his breath warmed her cheek, his words brushing the shell of her ear. Because you are under my protection now, he said. And he made the mistake of forgetting that. Her heart hammered. He wasn't asking permission. He wasn't hesitating. And for the first time in her life, someone powerful was standing between her and the darkness instead of dragging her into it. She let out a shaky exhale. What happens now? Alessandro's eyes softened in a way no one else would ever see. Now, he murmured, I take you home. And the way he said home made her wonder if he meant something far more permanent than he was allowing her to realize. The city was quieter than usual, a strange hush settling over the streets as Lila and Alessandro walked side by side. He didn't release her hand, not even once. His grip wasn't crushing, wasn't demanding. It was steady, unwavering, the kind of hold that spoke without words. You're not walking this road alone tonight. When she'd tried to protest, stumbling over excuses about the bus and how he didn't need to bother, Alessandro had simply given her a look, one that made her pulse skip, one that allowed no room for argument. No one touches what I protect, he'd said, and that includes the cold, the dark, and the men who lurk in both. So she walked, with him. Under the dim glow of streetlights, her nerves slowly unwound, even as her heart stayed tangled in knots. His presence was overwhelming, not in size, not in stride, but in the quiet certainty he carried like a second skin. Power walked next to her, shadowed her steps, wrapped around her shoulders like a coat warmer than anything she owned. For several minutes, neither spoke. Lila liked the silence, but it was Alessandro who broke it. Do you always flinch when someone raises their voice? He asked softly, without looking at her. Her breath froze. She wished she had a lie ready. She didn't. Not always, she whispered. A pause, not of surprise, but calculation. A man building a map of her wounds, memorizing each one. He hurt you, Alessandro said, voice controlled, too controlled. Your ex. She stared at the cracked sidewalk. He had moments. Mistakes, Alessandro murmured. Or spilling wine or forgetting a name. When a man lays hands on a woman, he makes choices. Lila swallowed. People don't usually talk about it like that. People don't usually talk to me the way you did tonight. He finally looked at her, and the weight of that gaze nearly stopped her breath. She'd never had someone look at her and see everything. Not just the marks of fear she thought she'd hidden, not just the trembling she tried to control. He saw the strength underneath. The girl who'd been surviving in silence. The girl who had stood on a patio and danced even when the world wasn't watching. It scared her more than Daniel ever had. "You don't have to fix me," she whispered. I'm not fixing you," he cut in. "I'm learning you." Her pulse stuttered. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. His steps slowed until they stopped entirely in the glow of a street lamp. She turned to face him, her breath misting in the cold air. He stepped closer, just enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him, enough that the night air hummed with the space between their bodies. "Because you let me see you," Alessandro said quietly. "Really see you. People don't do that with me. They hide, they fear, or they pretend." Lila's voice was barely audible. "I wasn't trying to do anything." "That," he murmured, "is exactly why it matters." Her heart twisted painfully, surprise and fear and longing blurring into something she didn't have a name for. He reached up, his fingers brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, unexpectedly so for a man whose name alone could end arguments, careers, lives. "You don't understand yet," he said, his tone darkening. "But tonight changed things." Lila's voice shook. "For who?" "For me." Her breath caught. "And what does that mean?" "It means," he said slowly, intimately, "that I will not allow anything or anyone to hurt you again. Not your ex, not the world, not even yourself." Her chest tightened. "Alessandro, that sounds like possession," he finished, eyebrow lifting. "Protection." "Both. Neither. Something more dangerous." He tilted her chin up gently. "It sounds like truth," he said. The wind stirred, but neither moved. The city fell even quieter, as if holding its breath for what might come next. Finally, they resumed walking, but this time his hand drifted from hers to the small of her back, guiding, steadying, claiming without a word. And Lila realized with a shiver she couldn't hide. She had stepped into his world tonight, without ever meaning to, and his world was already rearranging itself around her. Lila woke to something she never expected. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the eerie kind, the kind where the world felt like it was holding its breath. No sirens, no late-night arguments drifting through thin walls, no heavy footsteps on the staircase outside her apartment door. Instead, when she opened her curtains, she saw it. A sleek black SUV parked at the curb, 2 men in dark coats leaning casually against it. Another man pretending to check his phone across the street, but standing too still, too alert. Her stomach dropped. Security. His security. She rushed outside, heart pounding, anxiety soaking into her skin. One of the men straightened as she approached, expression unreadable beneath the morning chill. Can I help you?" she asked, voice uncertain. He gave a curt nod. "Good morning, Miss Hart." Miss Hart. Not Lila. She froze. "You're safe," he continued. "We're here on Mr. Rinaldi's orders. Temporary detail." Temporary. Her world tilted. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would he—" A voice behind her stole the rest of her question. "Because I said so." She turned, and there he was. Alessandro Rinaldi stood at the bottom of her apartment steps like he belonged there. Like this street, this morning sun, this small slice of her life had been waiting for him to arrive. He wore a dark wool coat, tailored perfectly, the collar turned slightly against the cool breeze. His hair was tousled, like he'd run a hand through it one too many times, an oddly human gesture for a man built of control and quiet danger. But it was his eyes that made her breath stutter. They swept over her, hair messy from sleep, oversized sweater, bare feet inside worn sneakers, and softened. Completely. Danger turned into warmth, authority into something startlingly close to affection. He took the last step toward her. "You shouldn't leave the house without shoes," he murmured. Her cheeks burned. "Why are your men here?" "Because last night," he said, "a man put his hands on you. A man who knows where you live. That situation needs to be settled." She wrapped her arms around herself. "This isn't normal, Alessandro. You can't put guards outside my house." His jaw flexed. "I can. And I did. That doesn't make it okay." He stepped closer, not intimidating, not forceful, just near enough that she could smell faint bergamot and cedar on his coat. "You're under my protection," he said gently but firmly. "This is what that means." Lila opened her mouth to argue, but the words tangled before release. Because even as fear twisted her ribs, another emotion curled through her chest. Relief. Warm, terrifying relief. She backed up a step. "This feels like too much." "Does it?" he asked softly. He reached up and brushed his fingers through a strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear with a tenderness that shouldn't have belonged to a man like him. Her breath faltered. "This is temporary," he promised. "Just until I clean up the mess your ex made." "I don't want you to get hurt because of me," she murmured. A quiet, incredulous sound left him. A laugh without humor. "Hurt?" he repeated. "Lila, men who come after what's mine should pray for something as gentle as pain." Her heartbeat stumbled. "I'm not yours." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, barely touching, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Tell me that again," he whispered, "and look me in the eyes when you say it." She couldn't. Her gaze darted away, and he smiled, slow, knowing, devastating. "Come on," he said, stepping back only when she swayed. "I brought breakfast." "You brought breakfast?" She blinked. He tilted his head toward the SUV, and a guard lifted a small, insulated bag. "You didn't eat last night. You were upset." She hadn't even realized he noticed. He always noticed. "And later," Alessandro added casually, "I'll stop by again. I want to check your locks, and I have someone bringing you pepper spray. Not that you'll need it." She stared at him, stunned. "You're doing all of this because of what happened at the wedding?" "No, Lila." His voice dropped to a velvet softness that made her knees weak. "I'm doing this because of you." Her heartbeat fluttered, fear, want, disbelief woven together. "You can't keep showing up like this," she whispered. "Yes," he said, brushing her cheek again like he couldn't help it. "I can." His touch lingered, warm, gentle, completely at odds with the men standing guard around them. Protection shouldn't feel like seduction. But when Alessandro's fingers slid down her jaw, when his voice murmured her name like a secret, it did. And Lila wasn't sure whether she was falling into something beautiful, or something dangerous enough to ruin her. Lila's shift ended early, a rare mercy on a day where every breath felt too loud, too heavy. Alessandro had texted her earlier, "Stay inside after dark, I'll stop by." But she hadn't answered. She needed space, or at least the illusion of it. Her life had tilted so violently, so suddenly, she still wasn't sure what pieces were hers anymore. The hallway outside her apartment was dim, a single flickering bulb casting off yellow light. She fumbled with her keys, exhausted, ready to collapse. A floorboard creaked behind her. She froze. "Lila." Her stomach dropped. The voice, too familiar, too sharp, cut through her like a blade. Daniel stepped out of the shadows, jaw clenched, eyes wild with the kind of desperation that always preceded something dangerous. He wasn't drunk. That almost made it worse. He was focused. "We need to talk," he said. She swallowed hard. "You can't be here." "I just want to fix this. We can fix this." His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with a practiced firmness that dragged her back months, back to every time he'd used the same grip to keep her from leaving. "No," she whispered, pulling. "Let me go." He yanked her closer, voice cracking. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You're talking to him now? That man is going to destroy you, Lila. You think he cares? You think you matter to him?" A trembling breath escaped her. "Please, stop. Daniel, just stop." He didn't. He shoved her back into the wall, crowding her, trying to make himself the only thing she could see, as if her world belonged to him again. "You don't walk away from someone who loves you," he hissed. "Let me go!" He raised a hand, not to hit her, but to slam the wall beside her, caging her in. But his hand never reached the wall, because another hand intercepted it mid-air. A hand with veins tight, knuckles flexed, strength coiled beneath perfect control. A hand she knew. Daniel froze, then turned, and his face drained of color. Alessandro stood behind him, coat still on, hair slightly tousled from the cold night air. But his eyes, Lila had never seen them like this. Gone was the warmth he saved only for her. Gone was the softness that touched her cheek, her hair, her name. These eyes were a warning, a sentence, a promise of violence. In one movement too fast for Daniel to react, Alessandro twisted his arm behind his back, pushing him face first into the door. Daniel cried out, choking on shock and panic. "You shouldn't have come here," Alessandro said, voice low, deadly low. "You shouldn't have touched her." She's lying," Daniel gasped. "She didn't tell you." Alessandro cut him off by slamming him harder against the wood. The wall shook. Dust drifted from the ceiling. "If you were smart," Alessandro murmured, leaning in, his mouth near Daniel's ear, "you'd beg for prison. Because the alternative is me." Daniel whimpered. Lila pressed herself back against the wall, breath trembling. She wasn't afraid of Alessandro hurting her, but the coldness in him, the precision of it, was terrifying to witness so closely. He looked like death wearing a tailored coat. "You don't get to come near her again," Alessandro said. "You don't get to look at her. You don't get to speak her name. You don't even get to remember her face. If you do, if you so much as breathe in her direction, every bone in your body becomes mine to break." Daniel shook violently. Please, I won't. Just let me go." Alessandro dropped him. Daniel collapsed to the floor, scrambling backward on his hands and heels until he could stand. He didn't look at Lila again. He didn't look at Alessandro either. He just ran, as if the hallway itself had turned into a graveyard. Silence settled slowly. Alessandro watched the empty space where Daniel had fled, chest rising and falling with quiet, leashed anger. His knuckles were scraped, blood already drying. His or Daniel's, Lila didn't know. Then he turned to her, and the transformation was instant. The fury vanished. The threat dissolved. His shoulders lowered. His expression softened in a way that struck her right in the ribs. He stepped toward her, slow and careful, as if approaching a frightened animal, even though he'd just scared away the only danger in the hall. "Lila," he murmured. She didn't move. Couldn't move. His fingers lifted to her chin, gentle, so gentle, and tilted her face up. Blood still stained his skin, but his touch was impossibly tender. "Did he hurt you?" he asked. She shook her head, breath shaky. "No. You were in time." His jaw tensed with what she now recognized as barely contained violence. "If I hadn't been—" "You were," she whispered. He exhaled slowly, forehead brushing hers. "No one," he said, voice low and rough against her lips, "takes what I've claimed." Her heart stuttered. "Alessandro!" "You're mine to protect," he murmured. "Mine to watch over, mine to keep safe." His thumb traced her cheek in a soft, reverent sweep. "And Lila," he whispered, "I don't lose what's mine." Something inside her broke open then. Not fear, not resistance. Something else. Something terrifying. Something warm. The ballroom shimmered in gold and crystal, chandeliers dripping light like melted stars. Unlike the wedding, where Lila had slipped through the service corridors unnoticed, tonight she walked through the main doors with her head held high and an invitation in her hand. Not a borrowed apron, not a tray of champagne flutes. An invitation, a seat, a name on a guest list, a place where she was meant to be. She felt every stare the moment she entered. Whispers trailed after her like the train of a gown she wasn't wearing. That's her. The girl from the wedding. The one with Rinaldi. Did he really? He brought her here himself. He hadn't. Yet. Alessandro was expected to arrive later, and the guests buzzed with the anticipation of his presence, like insects sensing the shift in weather before a storm. Lila found her table, fingers smoothing the elegant card with her name printed in looping silver. She still didn't feel like she belonged among the wealthy, the powerful, the glittering elite. But she wasn't running either. Not anymore. When the band began a soft instrumental number, a man approached her, handsome, smiling, wearing confidence like a tailored suit. "May I have this dance?" he asked, offering his hand. His tone was polite, but the room perked up with interest. People leaned in, hungry to see what the girl connected to Alessandro Rinaldi would do. Lila hesitated. Not from fear, from memory. A moonlit patio, a slow song drifting out into the night, a handsome man holding out his hand with a promise disguised as a request. "One dance," he had said, "one moment to claim you." Her heart tugged at the memory, soft and certain. The stranger's hand remained extended. "Just a dance," he coaxed gently. "It'd be an honor." But before Lila could answer, before she could lift her hand, or decline, or even breathe, a familiar warmth slid around her waist from behind. A hand. Firm, possessive, undeniably his. The stranger froze. The air thickened. A hush rippled through the room like a current of electricity. Alessandro's voice followed, low and intimate enough to curl heat through her spine. "You started this," he whispered against her ear, "the moment you danced alone." Lila closed her eyes for a heartbeat, the sound of his voice anchoring her, claiming her in a way no gesture could. She turned slowly in his arms, her breath catching at the sight of him. Dark suit, dark eyes, dark promise. The kind of man who could stop a room without lifting a finger. But his gaze wasn't on the room. It was on her. Only her. She didn't try to hide her smile. Not this time. Not now that fear had loosened its hold on her. Not after weeks of learning how Alessandro looked at her when no one else was watching. When he stood outside her door to make sure she slept safely. When he brushed her hair behind her ear without thinking. When his voice softened only for her. "Alessandro," she murmured. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that she saw it. The way tension eased from his jaw. The way his thumb traced her waist like he needed the reminder she was tangible. Real. His. He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles. Soft, deliberate, unmistakably possessive. The stranger backed away without a word. The room watched with open fascination. But Lila had eyes only for one man. "Dance with me," Alessandro said. This time it wasn't a command. It was an invitation. This time she didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his, willingly, openly, letting herself be drawn into his chest as he guided her onto the dance floor. The soft melody wrapped around them, and Alessandro's hand settled on her lower back, pulling her close in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The room faded. The whispers dimmed. The world shrank to him. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured. "You're biased." "I'm obsessed," he corrected, eyes burning. "Don't soften the truth." Her breath caught. Weeks ago, those words would have terrified her. Now they warmed her from the inside out. "You don't have to claim me." She didn't try to pull away. She didn't deny it. She didn't pretend anymore. Instead, she lifted her chin and kissed him. Softly at first, testing. But Alessandro made a sound low in his throat and deepened it. His hand sliding up her spine, gathering her close as if the world was finally watching the truth he'd known from the beginning. When they broke apart, the room was silent. And Alessandro Rinaldi, dangerous, feared, untouchable, looked at her like he'd finally won the only war that mattered. "You belong to me," he said softly, not asking. Lila's heart steadied in her chest. And you, her fingers lifted to his cheek, you belong with me. The band played on, the audience stared, and the dance, the one that started alone on a patio, finally had its ending. Or rather, its beginning.